Our guest is Dr. Judson Brewer. He is a world-famous neuroscientist and author of a book called The Craving Mind, From Cigarettes to Smartphones to Love, Why We Get Hooked and How We Can Break Bad Habits. His TED Talk has been heard by over 25 million people and counting, and we're very happy to have him here today. Welcome to the show, Judd.
Thanks for having me.
So before we begin, would you like to offer some comments about your own background and in meditation, or what you're going to share with us today?
I can give a little bit. I started meditating my first day of medical school back in the mid-90s. It was a stressful time, and I found it very helpful for me personally. Actually, so helpful that as I was doing this joint MD PhD program, and I was just practicing meditating on my own, going on long retreats and things like that. I shifted my whole career from studying molecular biology to studying neuroscience and clinical trials and addiction and habits related to how, because I was so blown away by how much mindfulness helped me with habits and helped me stay calm and focused, that I shifted my whole career to it.
So you are our second molecular biologist on the show. We've had John Kabat-Zinn, so I don't know how we've had two so far. Will you walk us through a meditation?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I'll do a very brief one, which is, and then we can actually talk about some of the science behind why we do something like this. It's called Fivefinger Breathing. Brian, are you familiar with this one?
Yeah, we did it last week with Corey Mascara. He walked us through this.
Oh, so if you just did that, then I'll lead a different one then. Whatever
you're most comfortable with. I mean, that was a great one. We can do that as well.
Well, I've done one or two others, so I can probably we'll try to add some variety here. The five-finger breathing, maybe just to build on that. I love the five-finger breathing because it brings together the seeing, where you have to watch your hands. It also brings together feeling, where you're feeling, this finger, and you're also feeling your breath at the same time. And what that does is to kind of help fill up all the working memory in our brains. Often in the background, there's this little worry or fear or this or that. And what that can do is kind of, make it hard for us to focus on something. So with things like the five-finger breathing, when we're focusing on, when we're bringing all of our senses together, it kind of fills up what I think of as like the analogy would be the random access memory of our brain. And it fills up that whole space so that we're focused just on that one thing. The other thing that it does is when we finish something like the five-finger breathing, we notice that our physiology is generally a little calmer. And so if those worry thoughts come back in, they have less emotional charge to them, and we can more easily see them just as thoughts, as compared to, something that's absolutely true or something we have to act on. So I'll just mention that as the beginning to kind of build on what y'all learned from the five-finger breathing last week. Maybe we can we'll do a curiosity exercise, since you mentioned it already. So what I'll invite folks to do, you can be standing, you can be sitting. If you're lying down, try not to fall asleep. But you can invite your eyes to close if you feel comfortable, if you're in a place where you can do that, which will allow you to bring your awareness more into your body. So just do that, and then maybe just take a moment to notice what your breath feels like going in and out of your body, wherever you feel it, maybe at your belly. Maybe even take a couple of deep belly breaths, just noticing what that feels like. Maybe taking 3 deep breaths in total. Now what I'm going to invite you to do is bring your awareness to your feet. Just notice what your feet feel like right now. And ask yourself this question: which foot feels warmer Was it your right foot or your left foot? Just get really curious. Or do they feel exactly the same temperature? And now bring your awareness to your hands. You don't need to move them. They can be wherever they are. They can even be touching. And ask yourself the same question. Just bring your awareness into your hands and ask, which hand is warmer than the other hand? Or do they feel exactly the same temperature? And now bring your awareness to your ears. See if you can just feel into your ears right now. What do your ears feel like? And ask the same question. Which ear feels warmer than the other? And now bring your awareness back to your hands and just relax all the muscles in your hands. And notice if you notice, as you relax, see if you notice any tingling in your hands. Is there tingling? Just get really curious about that tingling and see which hand is tingling more than the other. And then bring your awareness to your hands and your feet at the same time. Just notice what that's like to pay attention to your hands and your feet at the same time. And as you do that, just ask yourself, which of these 4 objects is warmest right now? And now see if you can relax all the muscles in your hands and relax all the muscles in your feet. And see if you notice any tingling in your hands or feet. And just be really curious, which of these 4 objects is tingling the most right now? Simply from that process of relaxation. Now, when you're ready, if your eyes are closed, you can invite them to open, just bringing your awareness back into the room, looking around, maybe hearing the sounds around you. And now check in with yourself. And if you can remember back as far as before we started this little exercise, just check in with yourself. How do I feel now as compared to just a couple of minutes ago before I did this exercise? And there we are. Short curiosity exercise.
So that was great. I've been doing this for many decades. That is a brand new meditation to me. And it makes sense to me because the activation of curiosity, I could see it in comparing one foot versus the other. It seems to be a binary choice. And at first it was, oh, the left one is colder. But wait a minute, there are shades on the top of the right one that are colder than, so it wasn't a clear-cut choice. At first it seemed to be. And then the more I engaged that curiosity, it seemed to be this whole investigation. So what you were saying before about it fills up a certain amount of RAM when you're curious about experience, did you mean to say that when you fill up a certain amount of RAM and attention, that it kind of squeezes out the ability to be fixated on anxiety or difficult emotions? Is that the idea?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's kind of like your computer. If you open up too many apps on your computer at once, everything slows down a bit. So if you open up this app in your brain, it doesn't even allow the other apps to open up because there's not enough RAM for them.
So if a kid is at home watching this and they're really stuck inside with cabin fever and they're kind of freaking out a little bit, simply just looking at which foot is warmer than the other is enough to momentarily interrupt the pattern of anxiety.
It's possible. They can certainly play with it. Sometimes anxiety can be pretty strong. And so if it feels like that isn't enough, that's where I would move to something like the five-finger breathing, where they're engaging more than just awareness of, say, a foot. They're engaging awareness and tactile sensation and awareness of multiple parts of their body, two hands and their breathing.
So your body is like a touchstone when you're experiencing difficult emotions. You can actually, most people would run away from their body because it feels uncomfortable. You can actually look at the body and you can find relief. Is that the idea?
We can. And especially, I think of the feet as an anxiety-free zone. So yes, especially up in our chest, it can be challenging. That's where a lot of people feel anxiety. So I wouldn't necessarily say use your chest as an anchor, but we can certainly use our feet. We can use our hands as anchors when we're feeling really anxious and just get really curious. Oh, what do my feet feel like right now? Or which foot feels warmer? Or what foot is tingling more? And we can drop into that anxiety-free zone.
I can even feel it now as I'm speaking to you. I'm listening to you and I'm looking at you, but I'm really feeling the bottoms of my feet touching the carpet right now, and it's giving me a sense of groundedness.
There you go. That's it.
So here's what we did. We wanted to see, many of the kids watched your TED Talk and they had some questions, but we wanted to poll them to see exactly where they're feeling right now at whatever week this is in the pandemic. So we asked the question, how much time do you spend using non-school related technology each day? Because remember, they still have, hours of homework assignments each day, but above and beyond that, how many hours are you spending using technology? 6.7% said 1 to 2 hours. 26.7% said 2 to 4 hours. Another 27% said 5 to 6 hours. 40% said 7 or more hours. This is video games, this is social media, this is cell phones, all of that. It's a lot of time.
That is.
Do you believe you are addicted to technology? Right on the money. 40% said yes. The same 40% who said 7 or more hours. 46.7% said maybe, like they're not sure. And only 13% gave a definitive no, I'm not addicted. So I'm going to take the maybe as probably a yes. And we wanted to drill into like what specific bad habits they have, because I know that that's your expertise, is how you can interrupt and overcome bad habits. Here's a sampling. Sleeping late. Watching YouTube videos for hours and hours. I think I can relate to that one. Eating when I'm bored. Biting my nails. Staring, someone said. Playing with my hair. Social media for more than 8 hours a day. I barely get to sleep because I'm on the phone all night, and I procrastinate. I put myself down a lot, and overthinking. Then I wanted to know, how do you break your bad habits? I keep busy doing something else. I haven't yet, but I'm planning to. I think that's the same kid who put down procrastination in the other one. I try to hide snacks so I can't see them. I take a nap. I try to distract myself with other things. I focus on what I'm doing. I haven't broken any bad habits. The more I try, I see no change. And someone said discipline and dedication. So I want to ask about that last response, because most people are led to believe that you can break bad habits and you can get things done in life by the power of will, dedication, and discipline. But your research kind of tells a little different story on that, right? So can you tell us more?
Yeah, depending on how extreme you want to take this conversation, some would argue that willpower has limits, like it gets depleted as you go through the day. Some would argue that willpower is actually more just a nice way of thinking about things, but doesn't actually have any research behind that willpower is actually a thing, even though it feels like we do have willpower. Let's take the former so that we don't get into any existential discussions today. Let's say that willpower is there and it gets depleted as we go throughout the day. The typical example would be that it's easy to resist eating junk food in the morning. And then by the time it's nighttime and we're tired or bored or, frustrated, the junk food calls to us. And so it's harder to resist it. How do I say this? If willpower works, then I wouldn't have a job as a psychiatrist. And what I mean by that is if we could think our way out of bad habits, then I could just tell my patients, patient comes in, says, I want to quit smoking. I'd say, okay, stop smoking. If somebody wants to quit bad eating habits like overeating, I would just say, stop overeating, and they would stop doing it, So that's really, it's limited at best. And, for anybody that's tried to break a bad habit knows it generally fails. Yet my lab's research suggests that this actually isn't the way that our brain works. The thinking part of our brain. So thinking and planning, true, absolutely, verified, useful, all this stuff. But thinking and planning are not really willpower, but willpower is thought to be involved kind of in the seat of a part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex, which is the youngest part of the brain from an evolutionary perspective. So it's the first that goes offline when we get stressed or when we get angry or when we get hungry or when we get, when any of these things that deplete willpower. So we can't really rely on willpower, which may be why it's hard to break bad habits using, solely relying on willpower.
And just to jump in, the prefrontal cortex, for kids who are unfamiliar with that, that's the region of the brain, like the command center. When you say, okay, I'm going to go outside, I'm going to do this. It's the thinking brain, right?
Yeah. It's the thinking brain. It's it's up here in the front of the brain, hence the frontal cortex. Yeah. So that part of the brain, let's call it weak at best. And it's much weaker than, if I wanted to change a bad habit, I would want to know what the strongest part of the brain is, because that's what I would need, because habits are really hard to break. And in fact, you can hack this reward-based learning system that is the oldest and strongest part of the brain. I think I mentioned it in my TED Talk that this, we set up habits as a way to help us remember where food is and as a way to avoid danger. And that whole process relies on what's called reward hierarchies. So, if we're given two choices, we're going to pick the choice that's more rewarding. So, for example, I don't know if anybody can relate to this, broccoli versus chocolate. Okay. So there's a reason that our parents don't feed us broccoli and chocolate at dinner at the same time, right? Given a choice, our brain would say chocolate, duh, right? Or ice cream, or you can whatever your favorite food is. So the idea is that our brains have set up these hierarchies for how rewarding certain behaviors are, and they're going to act out the one that's more rewarding. So the way that I help my patients break bad habits is I help them bring awareness in so that they can see really clearly how rewarding those behaviors are right now. And I say right now because most of these habits have been set up for years. Let's use food as an example. Every time we go to a birthday party when we're a kid, when you're 5, you associate cake with ice cream and presents and friends and parties and all this. And every time you go to a party, you're going to reinforce the reward value, let's say, of cake. So by the time we're older and we're thinking, we look at the cake and our brain says, just eat it, because it's set up this reward hierarchy. And it says, I already know how rewarding that is. You don't have to think about it. Just eat it. And then we eat a piece and we eat a second piece and we eat a third piece. And we think, well, why can't I stop eating this? Well, it's because the reward value is pretty high. Same thing is also true with smoking. For example, the folks in my smoking studies, They started smoking on average, you ready for this, at the age of 13.
Wow.
So you set up a habit at 13, and then you come into my clinic when you're, 30, and you've been reinforcing that habit for 17 years. And you wonder, wow, why is it so hard to break? I had one patient who'd been smoking for 40 years. He had reinforced that habit loop 293,000 times, right? So he was just smoking out of habit. So what I had him do was I had him pay attention as he smoked. And he realized that smoking actually it tastes like crap. It doesn't taste very good. That's why they have to put menthol in, and they have to do all these things so you don't actually taste it, because nicotine's an irritant. It's actually a toxin for our body. So our body's like, hey, this is crap. And you were like, oh, just ignore it. Or, we smoke mindlessly. So what I have people do is pay attention as they smoke, and they realize that smoking doesn't actually taste that good. And then that reward value drops, and it makes it much easier for them to change that behavior. We do the same thing with eating. We have people pay attention as they overeat and help them see that the reward value actually drops when you're eating more than when you're stuffing yourself as compared to when you're not stuffing yourself. I'll give one more example. I have a friend who's a food researcher at Yale. Her name is Dana Small. And for her PhD thesis, she fed people chocolate as she was scanning their brains. Okay. And what she had them do was rate how much they liked that chocolate. So, here's the kicker. She gave them their favorite chocolate. They could pick from a bunch of different types of chocolate before they started the experiment. And then she fed them that particular chocolate. So they start the experiment. She's scanning their brain. And of course, she asked them, how well do you like this? And they're thinking, this is great. Somebody's feeding me my favorite chocolate, and I'm getting paid for it, right? Because they get paid for these studies. So she feeds them more, so they rate this as 10 out of 10. This is perfect. She feeds them more, and that rating starts to drop. She feeds them more and more and more. And by the end of the experiment, they're hating the chocolate that they just loved, an hour ago or whatever, because they're eating too much of it. The kicker is they have to pay attention as part of the experiment, because they have to report on how much they like it. So the vast majority of us are not in a scientific experiment. When we're going through our lives and we're eating something, we're not paying attention to when we're actually full. And so we don't see that reward value actually drops. But our body knows this, and it can tell us this, and it's much easier to change behavior when we see how unrewarding it is. We can see how that applies not just to smoking or eating, but we can see how this even applies to YouTube videos. It's like, what's it really like when you've binged for 7 hours on YouTube videos? We're sitting there like a zombie. It's like, we don't even know where we are anymore. I wouldn't call that rewarding. So I'll pause there. I know I just mentioned a lot.
So like one example, I remember decades and decades ago, I would play video games like everybody else. Okay, it's a Saturday. I'll play Grand Theft Auto for 5 hours or 8 hours. And I was like, that is just great. I love it. It's awesome. It's whatever. And I remember one day just like checking in, because I had begun meditating, and I'm like, I feel awful right now. Like, I feel like soulless right now. This is not, I think that it's pleasurable, but it's really not at all.
Yeah, and this isn't to say that video games aren't exciting or whatnot, but we can look to see, like, what's it like when I play a video game for 10 hours versus 5 hours versus 2 hours? There's a big difference.
And when you say reward loop, like, let's go back to the chocolate cake, for example, just to break it down so kids get the idea. Mm-hmm. If you eat chocolate cake and you say you're being rewarded, but really, if we get granular with this, you're literally being rewarded with chemicals inside your brain like dopamine, right?
Yeah, I'm glad you bring that up, because I think of this from a pragmatic standpoint as the results. But from a neuroscience standpoint, we talk about reward. And the chemicals we're talking about are dopamine. Absolutely. So dopamine is considered this reward chemical because it fires with every known drug of abuse. Alcohol, cocaine, heroin, cigarettes. Actually, there's studies on Facebook showing that when you get a bunch of likes on Facebook, it also activates the same brain network with this dopaminergic network. Dopamine's there just to help us remember stuff. It's actually a molecule that lays down context-dependent memory.
So just to break that down for a second, what you're saying right now is that the same part of the brain that gets activated when you are on social media is the very same part of the brain that gets activated when someone takes heroin.
Yeah, but just to be clear, it's not just when you're on social media, when certain things happen, like getting a bunch of likes,
Right.
or getting, somebody randomly posts something and you get an alert for it. That's what fires the dopamine.
So Dakota had asked the question, she's a senior, what makes technology so addicting? What does it do to the brain? That's what it does to the brain. It gets you hooked the same way a drug would.
Yeah, and actually, I think it's helpful to unpack this a little bit. Technology. So these, the Cornell West, who is a professor at Union Theological in New York City, he called these things weapons of mass distraction. Our phones, right? And so phones are interesting because, one, they're always available, right? So if you're bored, you can always just pull out your phone and do something on it, right? Never available before phones were available. Two, if you have all your alerts set up for texting and social media and this and that, you never know when you're going to get an alert. That's called intermittent reinforcement, meaning you get this random reward, as in a random ping sets off your dopamine system that says, oh, check your phone, see what happened, see if somebody texted you or Snapchat you or whatever. That is the same formula that the casinos use for their slot machines, because you pull on the slot machine handle and you never know when you're going to win, right? But that's the most addictive type of learning known in all of science. So those are just some examples of why these things are so addictive.
And they're being intentionally designed in that way, right? So
Yeah.
Kids need to know this. Like if you're on Instagram or whatever, it's designed to make you addicted to it, so you don't want to put it down. So you feel bad if you put it down. So Amber asked the question, what are ways to help break technology addiction?
The way I think about this, it's a great question, Amber. The way I think about this is, if we don't know how our minds work, how can we possibly work with our minds? So the short answer is we have to know how our minds work. The slightly longer answer is you can actually break this into a 3-step process. And the way I do this with whether it's my clinic patients or people trying to change behaviors in other ways, is I first have them map out habit loops around whatever the behavior is that they want to change. So as folks probably remember from the TED Talk, you need 3 things, 3 core elements for a habit loop. You need trigger, a behavior, and a result or a reward. So, mapping out, okay, what was it that triggered my behavior? Was I bored? And then I went on social media, as the behavior. And then what's the result of that? How do I feel? Do I actually end up scrolling or whatever for another hour? So step 1 is mapping out that habit loop. If we don't map it out, we're just lost on autopilot. We're not even aware that it's happening. Step 2 is checking in to see how rewarding that behavior actually is. Because as I mentioned, changing the behavior isn't what reinforces or changes behavior. It's actually the result of that, how rewarding it is. So we think about this in terms of a cause and effect relationship. Whatever the behavior is, that's the cause. There's going to be an effect from that. And that's how rewarding something is. So I have people ask a simple question: what do I get from this? Right? Not intellectually, but feeling into their direct experience. What am I getting from this? So if somebody's scrolling on YouTube, on social media, they can be asking, what am I getting from this? And drop into their experience and see, how rewarding is it? Or if they're smoking a cigarette, pay attention as they smoke. If they're eating their 12th cookie, they can ask, what am I getting from this? Right? So that's the second step, is to see how rewarding the behavior actually is. When they see that if it's a bad habit, there's got to be something that's not rewarding about it. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a bad habit, right? This isn't to say that we're going to break all habits. This actually helps us reinforce good habits and break bad habits. Reinforcing a good habit would be seeing what it feels like when we exercise, right? For me, exercise feels great. I feel great after I exercise, and I feel pretty crappy when I haven't been able to exercise for a couple of days. So I can look at those 2 things. When I don't exercise, it's not very rewarding. when I do exercise, it's pretty darn rewarding. So that helps reinforce good habits, but also helps me let go of the bad habits. So that's step 2, is to see that cause and effect relationship. Step 3 is to bring in practices that help people step out of these old habit loops. And this is where a lot of mindfulness practices come in. So if somebody's anxious, they can bring in a practice like the Fivefinger Breathing as a way to step out of an anxiety habit loop. If somebody's overeating, they can simply pay attention, bring awareness in as that mindfulness practice to see, what am I getting from this, and eat very, very mindfully and see what happens. Can they stop when they're actually full, because they're paying attention and they're seeing when they're full or not. If somebody's judging themselves, I don't know if you all have gone through a loving kindness practice. Have you done that yet?
We did it with Sharon Salzberg.
Oh, the rock star of loving kindness. So y'all know what loving kindness is. You can pay attention, notice self-judgmental habit loops, map those out, step 1, see what you're getting from judging yourself, that's step 2. And then you can bring in loving kindness as step 3 to see what feels better. And I think about these third step practices as the BBOs, the bigger, better offers, right? Our brain's always looking for something better. So if we're judging ourselves, we can see how unrewarding that is. And if we're being kind to ourselves through loving kindness, we can see how rewarding that is. And that we're going to see, oh, kindness actually trumps, meanness. And then that bigger, better offer naturally starts to become the new habit. So that's the third step, is stepping out of the habit loop, often using mindfulness practices.
So if a kid is watching this right now, they might be listening to this and get lost a little bit into the theory of this. But what you're talking about really is present moment awareness. So when we talk about meditation, we talk about paying attention on purpose to the present moment. Not thinking about all of these ideas, or thinking about social media, or thinking about chocolate cake and how it's bad for me, but in the act of doing it, to really be mindful and checking, like, what does it feel like right now as I swallow down my third piece of cake? Or I'm on my 5th hour of being on Instagram. What does it really feel like physically in my body? And what I hear you saying, tell me if I'm wrong, is that when you investigate, you might realize, whoa, this is not as pleasurable as I thought that it was. But I didn't know that because I wasn't really curious about what it felt like.
Yep. That's a really nice way to put it. It's not, we can't think our way out of bad habits. It's not the thinking brain, it's the feeling body that drives behavior.
And speaking about thinking, tell me if I'm right on this. When I teach mindfulness, not just to kids, but to adults, I am common with this phrase. I say, thinking is a primary addiction. We are addicted to thinking, but I have like no scientific basis for this statement. It's just like something I throw out there. So can you tell me, as a neuroscientist, is that accurate, or am I just like blowing smoke?
Yeah, I wrote a whole chapter in my book called Addicted to Thinking that lays out a lot of the neuroscience behind it. Yeah. So thinking, we often think that thinking falls into a different category than, our 5 senses. But thinking is actually, we can get addicted to thinking just like we can get addicted to eating ice cream or smoking a cigarette or anything like that. And, especially when we start to notice how many times we're like, oh, I have a great idea. And then we get so caught up in that idea that it actually affects our other behavior. The simple definition of addiction that I love is continued use despite adverse consequences. Okay. So notice how thinking can fall right into that category. If we're overthinking something and it's leading to adverse consequences, it's fitting squarely into that definition of addiction.
So when people meditate, and it's very, very common, kids and adults alike, to say, I can't meditate because I try to sit down and meditate for 15 minutes and my mind is all over the place. But during those 15 minutes, if you even come back once, only once in those 15 minutes, back to this breathing, haven't you in some kind of way interrupted or like broken that addiction, at least in that moment?
Yeah. So if we're using the breath as an object, we have done that. This is where I like the attitude of curiosity. So if we're sitting down to meditate, maybe we're using our breath, for example, as an object to kind of help us keep us anchored in the present moment. Every time our mind wanders to some thought in the future and we get curious about that and we notice, oh, there's thinking. We're not as caught up in the thinking. And that already in itself, even before we come back to the breath, has broken that cycle.
So we have a student with us live. Her name is Avalon, and I want to check in with a kid here to see whether or not this is all landing. So Avalon, if you can unmute yourself and turn your video on. I know you have some questions for Dr.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so one of my questions that I have for you is, like, I basically need advice on how to stop procrastinating, because that's one of my main bad habits. And it's like, I know procrastinating is not like getting me anywhere, but for some reason I still do it.
So Avalon, would you allow me to, maybe we could go through these 3 steps together? Would that be okay?
Mm-hmm.
The one I just described? So if
Yeah.
so Avalon, if you were to map out the habit loop, what's the trigger for your procrastination?
I would say like, just like my laziness, I guess. Like, I don't want to, like, I want to get things done, but it's just like I'd rather not, which is weird. Like, I don't know. It's like it's
So-
complicated.
Yeah, so let's think of a concrete one. Is there a project or a paper or something that you've had that was due recently that you can think of?
Yeah, so like for my chemistry, I had a missing assignment, and it was like earlier in the marking period, and it's like later. It was probably like a week ago that I figured out it was missing, and I like just took forever to get it done, even though I knew it was there the whole time.
Yeah. So when you thought about that assignment, how did it feel? Did it feel, let's keep it really simple, pleasant or unpleasant? Just thinking about having to do it.
Unpleasant.
Okay. So that might be the trigger, is you have this thought about this assignment and you're like, oh, I have to do this assignment. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
Okay. So there's the trigger. The behavior, that's easy. That's procrastination. So what did you get? What's the third step is the reward. What did you get from the procrastination?
Nothing. My grade just took longer to get higher than what it was.
But even in that moment, like when you procrastinate in that moment, what do you get from not doing the assignment? How's it feel?
It kind of feels like relief.
Okay.
To me.
So I think of this as brief relief, right? That distraction, the procrastination as the distraction gives us a little bit of brief relief. And then after that brief relief is over, because it's brief, how do you feel after that?
I'm like, I start feeling bad, like, and like kind of mad, because it's like, now I have to do it to get my grades up.
Yeah.
But then I don't want to do it.
Yeah, this is perfect. Okay, so that's first gear. You just mapped, or first step, you just mapped it out. The trigger might be, oh, I have to do this. The behaviors, the procrastination. And then the result is that you get a brief relief, but then after that, all the stuff that you just said, doesn't feel good. So that's step 1. Step 2 is looking at that cause and effect relationship. So the behaviors, procrastination, and then diving more deeply into all of the results that come from that. So overall, if you combined the brief relief with everything else, what would you say the net effect is, good or bad, if we just kept it simple?
I'm going to need you to make that look clear, because I'm kind of confused with that.
Yeah. So let's say, okay, brief relief probably feels good, right? Pleasant. But then all the other stuff, the guilt, the other things you described, do those feel pleasant or unpleasant?
Unpleasant.
Yeah. So on the average, if you had to write those down and like make a tally, is there more pleasant or more unpleasant associated with the procrastination overall?
There's more unpleasant.
Okay. So that's step 2, is seeing that really clearly. Oh, overall, this procrastination doesn't get me anything. Does that make you more excited to procrastinate more in the future?
No.
Okay. So that's what we call disenchantment. This is a really critical aspect of mindfulness. Bringing awareness to behaviors that aren't serving us helps us see, oh, these really aren't serving me. Not in a thinking way, but in a feeling way, right? You just described it from your own feeling, like, oh, I'm not excited to procrastinate, right? That disenchantment helps build the momentum so you can move into the third step. Okay. So the third step here would be doing your assignment. So what did it feel like after you got your assignment done?
Josiah, I'm sorry. Can you say it again?
What did it
The
feel like
ending?
after you did your assignment, once you turned it in?
It felt like relief that I
Okay.
finally got it done.
So if you had to compare the doing your assignment, getting it done, to procrastinating, which one feels better?
Getting it done.
So there's step 3. You get to compare the two. Which one is the bigger, better offer? Getting it done. So how do you actually so does that make sense in terms of those 3
Yes.
steps?
Yes.
So how you put this into pragmatic use is you compare these things. Like, okay, I'm procrastinating again. You can reflect back on the last time you got an assignment done and turned it in and feel into what that feels like and be like, oh, that felt pretty good. When you can feel into that, that gives you the motivation to actually do the work and move into that third step practice rather than getting stuck in the procrastination habit loop. Does that make sense?
Yes.
That's great. Thank you for doing the exploration with me.
And that's different, right, than just like, again, thinking about it. If Avalon was to sit there while she's in the middle of procrastinating, okay, great, I don't need to do this. And then 3 hours later, oh no, I got to do this. I didn't get it done. If I had only done it 2 hours ago, like if she feels that at a deep level and brings mindfulness, the brain remembers this. And right, it'll make you more likely next time to be like, no, I got to get this assignment done because I don't want to feel like this.
Yep. It updates the reward value. It for both of those. So the procrastination reward value drops and the getting the assignment done reward value increases. And all of that comes from just seeing both of those really clearly. So good luck.
So Avalon, do you have any more questions?
No, that was all.
So I'm going to go a little off script right now. He may or may not want to come on. The assistant principal, Mike Bellotti, who has no preparation. He may choose not to do this. There he is. I see his picture. Just before you came on, Judd, we were having this conversation because he just began working out, exercising. And he's like, oh, no. He used to be in great shape. And that was like 7 years ago. Now he's putting on his old gym clothes. And he tried to run today and he felt like crap. And I've been working out for a year straight. So like I did it today and like you, I'm like, oh my God, I feel great because I associate it. So let's talk to Mr. Bellotti right now. How can we get him up and running in his exercise program?
All of this time and attention. I really appreciate everything you're doing here, sir. Just the background.
Bellotti, you have a world famous neuroscientist right now. It's going to help you. I'm only helping you. It's out of love.
Get it. Many years ago, as I told Brian, about 7 years ago, I was very much in shape. I was a gym rat. I was going to the gym 4 days a week, killing myself. But I got to the point where I was really happy with how I was running and everything. Life gets in the way. I'm working, sometimes 7 to 7 at night. Plus, I've got wife and kids, and finding to carve out that time becomes difficult. And then you let that time go, and now you have a dad bod at every aspect of the term. So I just started trying to run again, and I'm remembering how painful and miserable it all is. So any advice to help out with that would be very, very grateful. I'd be very grateful of right now.
How old are your kids?
My son is 9. My daughter is 4.
Okay. So I'm asked that because you can actually find ways to just start working out by doing stuff, like find workouts that you can do with your kids, right? Because you probably want to spend time with your kids, I'm guessing, and you want to work out, and you can actually bring those together where you can find fun exercises. It can even be as simple as like you take a piece of tape, you put it on the floor, and you jump back and forth, over it. Right? Simple aerobic exercise. You can do that with your kids. You can make it a contest. Be like, can you count how many times you did this and you time it for 15 minutes or whatever. Just an example of how you can take this 3-step process, just like Avalon and I mapped out. You can look at the habit loop. What is my habit loop for not working out? You can see, what do I get from this? Step 2. And then step 3 is you know, remember back to when you were in shape and be like, well, what did that feel like? Right. Because of course, when you first start running, it's going to be pretty painful to get started. But it's amazing how quickly that actually goes away. You know, the muscles or the memory comes back pretty quickly of like, oh, your muscles like, oh yeah, I can do this. First couple of days, a little more challenging, but that's where you bring in the fun, right? And you're like, oh, I got to play with my kids and we worked up a sweat and we all got in shape, you know, together. So that, you know, that's the one thing I would say is like, be creative around this. Take that 3-step process and see how you can apply it. Because I think you've got the bigger, better offer, knowing what it's like to be in shape, knowing that you can work out with your kids, and then compare that to not working out. I think it's going to be a no-brainer.
I you know, the thing is, I agree with you here. And even with now starting to do some stuff like trying to play some sports with my son and everything else. But then at the end, I want to go more. So maybe some bike.
You could also do bicep curls with a remote control.
No, it's the Doritos bag. That helps. That helps more. You know, you could say you're the not working out. I love me some Doritos. So that's a problem that we run into.
Well, so with the Doritos, I actually had a patient. We called her the 2 potato chip lady, because what she started doing was paying careful attention and eating potato chips one at a time, really mindfully. And she realized, believe it or not, this is a true story. After 2 potato chips, she was done. She got enough of the salt and the fat, and she was like, and she could actually put it away for the day. So I would say do that with Doritos and see how many. So here's the and this is for anybody that's working with like overeating stuff. How little is enough? And eat a bite of a Dorito. Don't eat the whole thing. Eat a bite, then eat another bite, then eat another bite. When you finish that Dorito, ask yourself, is that enough? And then you can tell by when you eat the next one, see, is it more rewarding? Is it the same, or is it actually dropping off? Compare that to eating them completely mindlessly.
I like that. That's something I will definitely take into account. At this time, I have to say thank you, Mr. Simmons, for bringing me on. Now I'm going to
anytime we can invade your personal life on the air. I'm happy with it. So Judd, thank you, Vladi. So, you know, you have gone on like a lot of meditation retreats. I've done the same thing. And one thing that is always emphasized when you go on a silent meditation retreat where you're practicing 15, 16 hours a day meditation is when you eat meals, to eat mindfully.
Yeah.
And if you go, it looks a little crazy from the outside, almost looks like an insane asylum a little bit when you see people just slowly eating like this. But when you become really curious about what your food tastes like, most people report, and it definitely happened to me when I got home after the first meditation retreat I was on, I ate like half the amount because I was tasting the food, my habit. I remember when I came back, my girlfriend at the time, she was like, hurry up, let's go, finish, because I was eating something really slow. So that's like a byproduct of, again, being mindful, aware while you eat.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad you bring that up. That's a really critical piece.
Jennifer asked the question, how long does it take to form a habit? And how long does it take to break a habit?
So if you search the internet, it's amazing what answers you get. So the most popular answer that I've seen on the internet for forming a new habit is 21 days. Okay. That's not true. That's a total myth. That is based on a plastic surgeon from the 1960s who wrote somehow his book became best-selling, where he pointed out that when he gave somebody a nose job, it took him about 21 days to get used to what that new nose looked like. And then somehow that became this meme on the internet that it takes 21 days to form a habit. Crazy. So the real answer is it really depends on the habit, right? So if we are breaking a bad habit, if we really see how unrewarding that behavior is really quickly, we can actually break it pretty quickly. We've embedded some tools, like some scientific tools, into some of the apps that we've created for smoking and eating. We found that you can actually change the reward value of eating too much or eating certain types of food within 10 times of people really paying attention as they ate. Okay. About 15 times it took for people to smoke a cigarette and really have that reward value drop. So it depends on somebody's genetics. It depends on the behavior. It depends on how much they're paying attention. And that paying attention is probably the most important element. Because if somebody's not paying attention, they're not going to update the reward value. But as they pay attention and they can see really clearly that something's not that rewarding, like Avalon really nicely described how not rewarding procrastination was, those behaviors start to go away much more quickly. The same is true for forming good habits. If we see really clearly, how good a new habit feels, then it's going to form much more quickly.
So Amber asked the question, this is her second question. She wanted to know how it helps young people, meditation, how it helps young people. And related to that, though, in a general sense, what does mindfulness and meditation do to the human brain when we practice?
Yeah. Well, so let's start with the brain question, then we'll go back to the first part of that. So there's a part of our brain called the default mode network. And I think it's aptly named because it's the network that gets activated when we are basically, when we're not doing anything in particular. And what we tend to do when we're not doing anything in particular is we think about ourselves, basically, and it could be, we're thinking about, something we did in the past, or we're thinking about something we need to do later, or we might be worrying about a relationship that we're having. If we just had an ambiguous discussion with a friend, we're not sure if they're mad at us or not. There's all this stuff related to us. Well, that network gets activated about 50% of waking life, according to the research. So that's a pretty active network. And on average, when that network is activated, we don't actually feel that good because we're regretting something we've done in the past, or maybe there's something neutral. Even if we're daydreaming about the future, it doesn't feel that good compared to simply paying attention to what's actually happening. So that network, my lab's shown this, other labs have shown this, that network gets really quiet when people are meditating. And it's not just when they're meditating, it's when they're being mindful, right? Meditation trains people to be mindful, but you don't have to meditate to be mindful. When people are being mindful, that network deactivates. And we've actually shown with where we can do these real-time neurofeedback studies where we can show people activity of their brain in real time. There's a short 60 minutes at a short blurb on our lab a couple of years ago where you can see Anderson Cooper's brain like changing in real time.
We watched that in class, actually.
Oh, perfect. So everybody knows what I'm talking about. So that network gets quiet when people are meditating or when they're being mindful. But importantly, we can see this. You don't need a neurofeedback device to tell what that feels like. When somebody has a craving for something, when they get caught up in perseveration, like when they're overthinking or when they're anxious about the future, it feels closed down and contracted. When they let go, when they're just totally noticing, oh, here's a thought, here's a feeling, it starts to open up. And this is especially true with things like curiosity and kindness, right? When somebody's kind to us, it feels more open. When we're curious about something, it feels more open. We're naturally drawn in. So that brain region deactivates, so that brain network gets deactivated, and that correlates with this feeling of expansion, of openness that actually feels better than being closed and contracted. So that's one of the main things that happens in the brain when we're being mindful.
And how does it help young people in ways that are different from older people?
I don't know if people have looked specifically at young versus old, but when I've looked across the spectrum, we just finished a study with this app called Unwinding Anxiety, where we got a 63% reduction in clinically validated anxiety scores in people with generalized anxiety disorder. So these are like the Olympians of worry. They're really good at worrying. So mindfulness, and we've tested this with people as young as 13, mindfulness can be really helpful for people to let go of worrying about things in the future. It can help them let go of getting caught up in cravings for overeating, certain foods and whatnot.
So we have a question about sleep. I can't sleep at night. What should I do?
It's a great question. So here, did you have them do the body scan as one of your practices?
Oh God, we give them a choice on Fridays. The body scan is always the hit. I don't know if they just want to take a nap in class or what it is, but everybody loves the body scan.
Okay. So if everybody knows the body scan, that's actually the first practice I recommend to my patients in my clinic who are struggling with sleeping. So when we go to bed, and my lab's actually doing a study on this right now with mindfulness and sleep. When we go to bed, our head hits the pillow and our brain says, my turn, and starts, like worrying about the future or regretting things that we've done in the past. And then we look over the clock and we can't sleep, and we're worried that we can't get to sleep. We're not going to get enough sleep. And so that makes things worse. The body scan is a great way to draw that awareness away from this spiraling out in the brain and just into our body, so that we don't feed the process. So if somebody's having trouble sleeping, body scan, every night. That's what I'd recommend. That would be my prescription.
So that's exactly the same as you said before about the hand meditation. Again, We're taking the attention, we're starving the analytical mind, and we're grounding it into a physical sensation.
Yeah.
These apps that you mentioned, are there any resources for people if they want to check out an app that might be helpful for any of these anxieties or quitting smoking or anything that you've mentioned?
Yeah, they can find them. My website is just drjud.com. And it actually has a bunch of resources and some really nice animations that teach all the neuroscience behind this. So if folks are interested, they can look at some of those resources on the website.
Lastly, someone asks about depression. Can mindfulness help with depression, and what are signs of depression?
Yeah, so signs of depression are, feeling down, sleep over, feeling like they need to sleep all day, getting caught up in these habit loops around, feeling like everything's terrible, things like that. It can even affect the appetite. It can affect a lot of things. So mindfulness is one of the most well-researched areas in mindfulness is actually around mindfulness for depression. There's a program called mindfulness-based cognitive therapy that's been shown to be really, really helpful in helping people with depression.
So before we close, is there anything you want to leave us with, the kids at home, the staff, students, educators watching, as we continue not only with the pandemic, but the unrest that's happening in the country, all of the anxiety, the fear, the outrage, everything that's happening, emotions are at a boiling point right now. Is there anything you'd like people to know?
Oh, I've related to the pandemic and anxiety just in general. I put out about 25 short YouTube videos on my YouTube channel. So if somebody's been watching YouTube, you can check out the channel. And they're, between the 25 topics, it covers just about everything in terms of what's going on right now. It gives usually like 5 minutes where it gives a little bit of the neuroscience and then usually a short mindfulness tool that they can use throughout the day to help them work with whatever the issue is, whether it's being addicted to the news or worried about the news, or worried about the future or anything, even grief and all sorts of things. I've covered a bunch of topics. So that's what I would just bring up is there's a resource for folks on YouTube.
And finally, the structure of your brain, this is just a personal question, it changes the more you meditate. I've heard, so like I'm going to calculate that I've probably meditated somewhere in the neighborhood of about 10,000 hours. If I was to put, is the structure of my brain fundamentally different than had I never meditated, or if I only meditated for 1,000 hours? Does it actually physically change?
That seems to be what the research suggests. Yes.
But have you seen it like on an MRI or a scan?
We haven't done the brain, size and structure studies. We've just done brain function, like what regions fire differently. But we have found that there are actually different connections that are formed in the brain in people that have meditated. Actually, on our study was about 10,000 hours. So yeah, there are differences in how the brain fires in terms of how it connects in its firing in experienced versus novice meditators. So we've seen that in my lab.
Because that's how I sell it to the kids. I say, you're changing your brain right now. So
they are. It's true. Yes. And my lab has some of the research to back that up.
So, Judd, this has been incredibly beneficial. Thank you so much for sharing your time, your expertise with us. That was jam-packed with practical techniques. I know it benefited me personally, and it will benefit the kids and educators watching right now. So thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Okay, everybody, stay safe. Take care of yourselves. Until next time, stay calm and connected. Take care.